The Beehive Meals Hero of the Week. The KSL Sports Zone and Beehive Meals are honoring people that impact youth sports in our communities. Nominate the youth sports volunteer that you know for the Beehive Meals Hero of the Week at kslsports.com/contest. Listen every Thursday afternoon to Jake and Ben for the winner. It's the Beehive Meals Hero of the Week. Joining us now is Mr. BYU extraordinaire, BYU insider for KSL Sports, Mitch Harper. Mitch, thanks for coming in. Right off the bat, we know that they report Monday, practices start next Wednesday. Going into this season, when do you recall expectations being this high, if ever, since you've been doing this?
I think it's the highest it's been in the Kalani Sitake era. I think the only other two seasons that maybe can compare in terms of high expectations, 2022, but that still feels tame considering that was independence.
Right.
Maybe you go to 2016 with Ty Detmer and, just the hoopla with that and the first year of Kalani and the excitement that he brought. You probably have to go back to 2008, the last time there's been this high of expectations where it was quest for perfection. This is probably the highest since then, and I think what makes it maybe the highest in the history of the program is the fact that there's a clear path to the playoff. BYU's never had that, and I think that alone makes this the greatest stakes, the most anticipated, and highest expectations for this BYU football program.
I think that's accurate, man. Sports radio has a tendency to be known for dramatic and never and always the best, the worst. But in this situation, as you just laid it out, there's a lot of truth to it, and there's a lot of evidence because they didn't have a path to the playoff. We know that Utah, in their undefeated seasons, were locked out. Now, the playoff was much smaller then. It's basically just two teams. So in this regard here, we've got 12, and they've got a clear path. It's there. There for sure if you win. It's there if you should manage to beat Notre Dame and maybe lose a game or two that you can get an automatic bid. And it seems like I don't know if the word is pressure, but maybe momentum is a better word, that is growing for the Big 12, particularly if BYU were to beat Notre Dame. And so you've got this conference schedule, which conference games are huge, but you got Notre Dame over there. And Notre Dame is expected to be a top 5 team, and you look at their schedule, and it's reasonable to conclude, it's October 17th, I think, that Notre Dame can come in to Provo undefeated. And if BYU should, which is not going to be an easy task, because what do they got? Arizona at home and then TCU on the road leading up to that. But if they do, and that they would knock off Notre Dame or even play Notre Dame close, that maybe this could be the year that an at-large bid, so that even ramps up the expectations even more. You don't necessarily have to win the conference.
Well, and also, too, the fact that everyone, as they said back in January, is running it back and, talking to people at that time in those January, roster building, retention phase of roster construction. That was a wild time where big dollar amounts are getting thrown around, and so BYU's spending money. Now, are they perceived at the level of Texas Tech? No. They're still probably, I would say, probably about another $20 million short of what Texas Tech's going to be paying, which is reported around like $45 million. But BYU's invested. They want to win, and we've seen that in the Big 12. And I think I look at this season, too, in a way, PK, that it almost feels a little bit like a year one as well, because now we're in this new era with Kalani Sitake where he is established as the guy. And, a year ago at this time, I remember we were previewing the season. I thought there's no reason to ever move on from Kalani. But clearly Kalani felt slighted and that he felt like there wasn't enough resources being poured in to where he flirts with Penn State. Now he knows he's got the resources that he was seeking and for his staff. And the challenge now is to make BYU a powerhouse. He once said that he wanted to be the Polynesian Lavelle Edwards, and I think Lavelle kind of said, hey, maybe don't do that a little bit. But, he now has that path, that opportunity to make BYU a power. And I think that's the challenge in front of him, and it starts with this year one of this new era where he is comfortably in place as the head coach of the Cougars. I think that's kind of an underlying fun storyline as well with this season that's going to be highly anticipated.
Yeah, last December was a bizarre month here in the state. There was a time that I thought that right now, today, we'd be talking about Jay Hill as the BYU football coach.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that there were people on the staff who thought Jay Hill was going to be the football coach because they thought that Kalani was going to take the Penn State job, and that there were some people, and literally assistants, thought they were moving, and they were anticipating moving, that they would go with him if Kalani had decided that coaches XYZ, like Kyle did, would take whomever he decided to take with Michigan. And so that did not happen. And then 3 weeks later, not only is Jay Hill not the BYU head coach, he's not the BYU defensive coordinator. That was the day after Christmas. That was a bizarre 3 weeks in the state of Utah college football history. So that leads me to, with Kalani being secure and getting what he was looking for and all that, and wanting to stay at, I think that's where his heart was, and if BYU came to the table with sufficient funds, that he would stay, and he did. But he loses Guilford as the corners coach, and then Jay Hill goes to Michigan to be Kyle's defensive coordinator, and they elevate Kelly Poppinga. So from a coaching standpoint, I think those are the two changes, right?
That's right. And then you bring in Chad Kahaha as elevate him from analyst to outside linebacker position coach. But as far as losses, that was it. And that's pretty impressive. And I think it was also noteworthy, too, that they kept Gary Anderson, because we know, what's interesting with K-Pop is that he connects those great Bronco defenses, and there were some great ones, back in 2012, where they were maybe the best defense in college football with Kyle Van Noy, and even the defenses that K-Pop was in the middle with in 2007. I remember statistically they were one of the better defenses nationally. He connects the Bronco era, but he's also become, the past 3 years, a little bit of the student of the defense that we've seen up close and in person for decades that stood the test of time. The Kyle Whittingham, Fred Whittingham, Kalani, Scally defense, Gary Anderson defense. Now he's learning that, and he can bring the best of both of those worlds together. I think that's a fascinating dynamic. And Kalani always knew that K-Pop was going to be his DC because, and I think that's what's impressive about Kalani, what he has done when he has to pull a lever on the coaching change. There is usually an upgrade. We saw it from Detmer to Grimes, from Tuiaki to Jay Hill. This is probably the most challenging one because this was a guy that left. It wasn't a firing. Jay Hill departed for Michigan, but I think that typically we have seen an upgrade in BYU improving whenever Kalani has to make a change. And he was pretty bullish on K-Pop, and I think the early returns would suggest it's been a pretty good fit thus far. Now the true test comes with camp approaching. Yeah,
I always thought Kelly, he was a dynamic player, and he's a dynamic personality, and he's one of these guys that could relate. If I brought in football, you have a hodgepodge of people, and they all come together. That's what's fascinating about it. That if I brought in three guys, just say as an example, and they all came from different backgrounds, Kelly Poppinga would find common ground with each of those three. He'd be able to relate to each of those three in some way, and then he would get each of those three to find a way to relate to each other. So as a human being and then as a recruiter, I thought he was top-notch. Now he gets this opportunity to be as a defensive coordinator for the first time, but he's been trained by some really good people that are, and some of the people are still in the program. You mentioned Gary, and Kahaha has been around the block himself, and he has been in the state too, under the tutelage of Gary and at the U of U and all that stuff. So I don't know if I can say a seamless transition, a seamless transition, but given the fact that there's a lot of holdover dudes who were on the team last year, I'm not really expecting them to miss a beat. I'm with you, and I think that stopping the run, I think, is going to be critical for this group, and I think their defensive line is going to be really good this year. I think this is going to be one of the better defensive lines Kalani's had since he's been the head coach, because last year there was a little bit at times bend but don't break. They dropped
They were 35th nationally in total defense this season ago. They were 13th 2 years ago in 2024. So there was at times a little bend but don't break. And remember, they'd get down big in some games. Even Colorado, they're down 14-0. The bowl game against Georgia Tech. If they can be better at stopping the run, and I kind of look at, last year, you look at some of the top, 15 teams in total run defense. It was about 100 yards or less. Can they be in that territory? Because I don't think Texas Tech's slowing down. And at some point, you might have to face them if you get there in a Big 12 championship game again. You got to be a stout, elite run defense, because I would expect Texas Tech is going to be that once again. BYU's got the personnel, I think, to potentially do that. Someone like a Justin Kirkland, who's finally healthy. He was expected to be big last year, but he was never healthy. And then Keanu Tanavasa, preseason first-team All-Big 12 guy, and Bodie Schoonover, I'm expecting a jump from him, as well as a senior once from American Fork. So there's some good depth there. And even Kelly Papinga last December, before he became the defensive coordinator, he even said that they felt great about the future at defensive end in the program. That's when he was the D-ends coach, to the point where they knew even last December that they were not going to pursue portal guys. They really believed in the young personnel. Well, let's start to see the early returns on that talent at that spot this season.
That's the voice of Mitch Harper, KSL Insider. You can read all of his stuff at KSLSports.com. Comprehensive coverage of the Cougars and Utes that we have here on the KSL Sports Zone. Now, with that in mind, you talk about stopping the run, getting the quarterback, those types of things from the down linemen. I got the impression that talking at the Big 12 Media Day, which is, 3 weeks ago now, that a guy like Tanavasa, who's in the middle, he was irritated that Jack Kelly led the team in sacks. That he took that as, I don't want to say disrespectful, because Kelly's a great player and he'll go on and play in the NFL, and good for him. But he felt like, we need to be doing that.
Yeah.
My guys that are side by side, not the guys behind us, the guys next to me, we need to be bringing that quarterback down. So we need to increase. So basically, listening to him talk is like, that better be us this year, and I'm going to put us on notice. Now, you guys were down there too. We were doing the radio. You guys were doing other stuff. And so I'm sure you had opportunities to talk to him about that. Did you get that feeling like I did?
I do. And I mean, it's been a long time, since BYU had a dominant pass rusher. You got to go back to Bronson Kafusi last time they had 10-plus sacks from a defensive lineman. That was 2015. And that's been shocking, I think, in the Kalani era, is that they just haven't had those elite defensive lines. I think everyone assumed when Kalani became the head coach that it would just be Sac Lake City carried over to Provo. And that just really hasn't happened. And some of it's been maybe they took a lot more developmental personnel that were unknown two-star recruits. And, that was a hit and miss type of deal. And they never truly had the depth to be that level of production. I think they feel now that they've got that star power along the defensive line and from the strength and conditioning staff too. Kalani will always say, the sports science and things like that, but they really do believe that they've physically gotten to a level where they can be elite in that area. But yeah, I think that Keanu Tanavasa, he was very bullish on the defensive line when asked about the position that's going to be maybe the strongest on the team. He was kind of biased and said the defensive line. And I think some of those guys, too, I'm curious to see how they kind of configure. Is it going to be more of an odd front, at times where you got three guys potentially with this group? And because you could have, Nusi Talmoy-Peau, who could be an edge rusher, but obviously an outside linebacker, Hunter Clegg, in that same mold of that outside linebacker, edge rusher. How do they utilize these guys? That'll be kind of fun to see. Maybe some inkling in fall camp, but truly when the games start happening. But this Keanu Tanavasa, too, I think has got to take a step forward as well, because I think a lot of Cougar fans, when they signed him out of the portal, they expected the Keanu that was dominant in 2024 against BYU at Rice-Eccles Stadium. That Keanu did not show up enough last season, and I think that's why he's back this year, because a year ago at this time, he thought he was off to the NFL.
Yeah.
And so I think there's some motivation there for him to be more dominant as well, and it's got to show up.
Well, for sure. as far as that goes. Now, that's not to take anything away from the linebacking core. We know Kelly, I just mentioned him, he's gone. But everything we hear about this Cal transfer, Ulavale, is that how you say it?
Uluwave, yeah.
Yeah, that they're expecting basically the same type of production. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, first-team All-ACC selection at Cal last year, once a Pac-12 Freshman of the Year in his first season at Cal. He's going to step right in and be a star. I mean, he might be one of the fastest players behind Evan Johnson on this team, as far as speed goes. And he was playing throughout spring with a club on his thumb. Now he's fully healthy, but he was even dominant with the club on his hand. So Keita Uluwave is going to be an excellent football player for BYU. And what's crazy is he could have a second year after this one with the 5-5 ruling. If in fact that actually gets all cleared, he could have another year after this one. So he's going to be a special player, and how BYU utilizes him, I think too. He'll probably be a guy I would expect would probably be that green dot coach to player communication. Get that? That was last year. That was Jack Kelly who had that sticker last season. But I think that he's so violent. I mean, he just gets downhill with his speed and the physicality too that he plays with. And you pair him up with Isaiah Glasker. I think Sialia Sarah, he's fully healthy. He's looking to kind of bounce back and become more of a factor in this linebacking unit. And then, Nusi Taumai Payout, Braxton Lindsay, a true freshman from Arkansas. He could be a name to really watch. He was one of the stars that took over in the Isaiah Glasker role during spring while Glasker was out. Lindsay could be a two-deep guy as a true freshman. They are stacked at linebacker, and they've even got some deep-cut guys like Pearson Watson from Flagstaff, Arizona, who they really like. This is
Flagstaff,
a really good
Arizona.
Yeah, this is a really good linebacker unit. I spent 2 years in
Flagstaff, and that was not on a mission.
Coconino High School, PK.
Coconino, yeah. Coconino High School. Coconino County.
What were you doing in Flagstaff?
I went to NAU.
Okay.
For 2 years.
Gotcha. I didn't know that. It was ASU. I didn't know there was a stop at Northern Arizona.
Yes. There was 2 years at Northern Arizona. My first 2 years out of high school.
I didn't know that.
At heart, I'm a Big Sky guy.
So you're a lumberjack then.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But it's a good linebacking unit, though. That's for sure. I think this will be, and I think that's kind of been the strength, I think, of BYU defenses, because historically it was always, cornerbacks, you're going to take a flyer, maybe get some JUCOs back in the day,
right,
get some 2-stars, but that's always been the bread and butter of BYU football. And K-Pop being a former linebacker, I only think that's going to continue, maybe even a higher level potentially going forward. But that is always going to be the position of strength for BYU football defensively. And 2026 on paper would suggest that that's going to be more the same, if not better, this upcoming fall.
And Ulavale, I thought he had the coolest line. Now, he went to Cal Berkeley, which is known for having uprising or two, and that's before 9 o'clock each morning. And he said he's traded in protests for prayer.
So fitting. I even asked him, too, back in April, just the shock of going from Cal to BYU. And I said, on the surface, that sounds pretty extreme. Like, how has it been for you? And he even noted that it is a lot different. He says he's glad to be back home because he's former Mountain Ridge High product, and BYU didn't recruit him that much. And he goes to Cal and was a heck of a football player for Cal. But, yeah, he did note that a little more family-oriented at BYU, a little bit different culture, obviously, with Kalani Sitake and the way that the players in the locker room operate. It's much different, but he definitely feels, as he put it, at home. He even noted that there's some deep family connections that he's found out from in Provo. But he's going to be, I think, a really good fit for BYU in this defense. How
do they replace Tanner Wall in the back end?
Well, I think their safety position is going to be a position of strength. You look at Raider Damuni, Falatau Satawala as the top two guys. And Falatau, I think, has got the potential to be one of the all-time great safeties in BYU history. I really do. And there's been some good ones. I mean, you go back through the years, Morrell, Kainakua. I mean, even some years in Bronco where Andrew Rich. I mean, there's been some Francisco, really good safeties. But I think Falatau Satawala, I mean, his size, his speed, his athleticism, and his playmaking ability last year, that Iowa State game where he gets an interception, he's going to be big time for the Cougars. And Kalani told me that they expect him to play during fall camp at some point, maybe not week 1, but they expect him to practice with that injured right foot in fall camp, and that Kalani said he will be ready to go week 1. He told me at Big 12 Media Days. So they're expecting Faletau to be fully healthy, ready to roll for the season ahead, and that's critical because he is key to that defense. And then, Raider Damuni, he goes into his senior season. I think he's been really solid throughout his BYU career, but can he take a greater jump? He's really good, but I think that there's got to be more maybe consistency. Remember, he was starting in front of Faletau last season before he got injured against Arizona midway through the year. And then I think a wild card on the back end of the defense is true freshman Kenan Pula from Lone Peak High School. He could be one that maybe emerges as that third safety. You've also got Tommy Parasis, too, who could play that safety nickel spot as well. You could see 3 safeties on the field at times a lot this year, but then Kenan Pula being that third or fourth guy. So I think it's a really good safety position, even without Tanner Wall, who's off to the Raiders, and I think he's got a great chance to make that Raiders squad.
All right, that's Mitch Harper. We talked defense. We'll switch over to the other side of the ball. Stay with us, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday morning. We've got Mitch Harper, our KSL Sports Insider for BYU, be with us for the next 2 segments, and then at the top of the hour, we'll flip it and we'll go to Utah. Steve Bartle will be in, and we'll be talking about the Utes. So we covered our defensive perspective. Offensively, this is crazy, man. This is the first time that they've had a returning quarterback since
Jaren Hall.
Yeah, going back.
Before the Big 12 era.
Yeah. And they've managed to have success, and I think Bachmeier caught us by surprise a little bit. Didn't catch me by surprise that he was the starter because I thought he was going to win the job all along as long as he got down the offense, and he obviously did get the offense down. Now, he was so highly productive, but yet now more we're expecting. How do you define more?
He's got to, I think, improve his completion percentage. That was about 64% last year. Get it up to around 70%. I think that's going to be the expectation there because there's a little bit of a blueprint with Zach Wilson, Jaren Hall. Those have been the best performing quarterbacks under Aaron Roderick at BYU, and those guys were hovering around 70%, and those probably their best seasons in 2020 and 2021. So if they can get to that, if the Bear can be to that level of accuracy, that could serve BYU quite well. And I think also the deep ball, you saw in that Big 12 championship game, he was obviously hobbled, but he couldn't throw it down the field. And again, I think it was in large part because of that ankle that got hurt on that first scoring drive in that game. But, his deep ball accuracy, that's been a calling card of Aaron Roderick offenses in the past with Zach and Jaren Hall is the ability to stretch the field, and even Jake Retzloff, too, at times. So does BYU, their offense, move a little faster? Last season, they were 9th in time of possession. Seemed like they were kind of a slow, methodical moving, took care of the football, very safe, didn't unleash the playbook. Well, as Bear put it, the playbook is completely unleashed to him now. And even Aaron Roderick said he's got 3 or 4 different looks on any given play. That's the type of stuff that Zach and Jaren were getting. So that's kind of the expectation, is to step it up to a higher level. And I think this is an important year for Bear because, when I asked A-Rod this in spring, how are they going to handle, next year, Ryder Lyons and Bear? And Ryder Lyons, the highest rated recruit since Ben Olsen in 2002, a quarter century. If Bear takes a step back, has a sophomore slump at all, does that create a quarterback debate? So I think it's an important season for Bear to be really good. I think he will. I don't think there's going to be a sophomore slump. I thought he was really good in spring, and I expect that, physically he's dropped some weight, look a little leaner, even though he does say he's still on the seafood diet. He loves to eat, but he does look physically better than he did last season. He looked like a kid. Now he's been a full year in a college weight room, but I think that's kind of an interesting element here is that you've got that blue chip recruit waiting in the wings. So it's an important year for Bear if he wants to cement himself clearly as QB1 for the foreseeable future. And as of right now, he clearly is. But You got to continue to have success because the tides can turn quickly if you struggle at all at quarterback, especially with a season with such high expectations.
Do you think there's a chance that Kalani talks about he doesn't care how you score, just score, that with that in mind, they could be less reliant on L.J. Martin?
I think they got to I think LJ still is the centerpiece of it all. And I think, obviously with the ability to stretch the field through the air, Kalani, I think to his core, would love to have more of that because I think it's almost like a hat tip to the BYU offenses of old and, Kalani being growing up the BYU fan. And I think that's just the style of play. Like BYU wants to be an entertaining product, that high-powered offense that can beat you in many different ways. Last year was pretty much on the ground, win 24-10 and call it a day and move on with it. Still, LJ is going to be the key focal point. I think LJ is going to be better this year, even though last year he was the Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. He could be better this season. So I think that he's going to have a big year. And I think Bear's still going to run quite a bit, though. And I think that's going to be something that I'm really curious to see this season. How much does he run? I think it'll be about the same because that's just kind of in Bears DNA. And there's not a proven number 2 guy after LJ right now.
Right.
Sione Moa, expected to be that RB2. And I think Sione, when healthy, he's really good. But coming back from compartment syndrome where even Intermountain Health was putting out a Facebook post saying, we nearly amputated the man's leg, and now he's going to be RB2 this year. So that's kind of a wild turn of events that I'm not used to seeing from a player's career arc. But, Devon Eka as well from Lehigh High School, really big physically, but has he got up to speed with the playbook? That's kind of a question there too. But running the football will still be at its core, but they got to have more of an ability to stretch the field downfield through the air.
Now, we got these 2 tight end transfers coming in, right? You already talked about Ryder, his older brother, Walker, and the other guy from Oregon.
Roger Saliapaga.
Yeah, and so we know BYU, you talk about linebacker, historically has been a strong spot. Tight end, too. And they had it last year with Carson Ryan, obviously, and he's off to the NFL. We'll see. Hopefully he makes that team. Is it Cleveland?
Cleveland Browns.
Yeah. And so with that in mind, what can we expect from this tandem?
I think that, that's going to be the guys that maybe lead the team in receiving yards. Last year BYU had 2 players that were in the top 7 in the Big 12 in receiving yards with Parker Kingston and Chase Roberts. I don't see a wide receiver right now that would come anywhere close to that. The top 10 of the Big 12 was around 750 yards. I don't see – I think that I'd be more confident in the tight ends, maybe having someone emerge with that level of production compared to the current wide receivers. Last year, Carson Ryan had about 620 receiving yards. I think Walker Lyons or Saliapaga, them together definitely could pass that. But one of them on their own could pass that. So, Saliapaga and Lyons, it was pretty evident that they are some of the best players in the program. And I'll admit, I was a little bit surprised with Saliapaga. I didn't really know what to expect from him because he really didn't play at all at Oregon. But he steps in and instantly becomes a key piece for BYU. And I think it's interesting, too, that these guys that were, maybe Big Ten buried depth chart guys. Walker Lyons played more than Saliapaga, but they instantly step in at BYU and just become stars, or at least they're assumed to be stars. Maybe is that the highlighting of the talent gap between Big Ten and Big 12? I don't know, but it is kind of interesting when you do look at it that way. I think that they're going to be key focal points, though. And Walker Lyons, I think, is the better receiving tight end. I think he can do it all, too. But Saliapaga's got a lot of speed as well. I think, he could be really a key factor as well. So I think this is a really good tight end tandem. Lyons, I think, is probably the best NFL prospect out of those 2 tight ends. But now they have an extra year as well with the 5-5 if that goes through. So this could be a nice tandem in the mold of back in the day, Chad Lewis, Atula Mealy of old, maybe potentially throwing that out there with maybe this could be a 2-year deal where these guys could be a great 1-2 punch at that position.
So you bring up the tight ends and you praise them, and I get the impression that it is, and you brought up the Roberts and Kingston last year. So praising the tight ends comes a little bit at the expense of the receivers.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't think there's any clearly defined 1, 2, and 3. I think the messaging that you would want to hear if you're a BYU fan from Kalani and A-Rod and Fesi Sitake is that these are our top 3 receivers and we're rolling with them. I would assume that's probably JoJo Phillips, Kyler Casper, and I would say true freshman from Lehigh High School, Legend Glasgow. That's probably the top 3 guys that I would expect going in to fall camp. And, Legend Glasgow, even Bear Bachmeyer raved about him at Big 12 Media Day, saying he knows the playbook inside and out, and he made great plays right away. And I think there's a real opportunity there. JoJo Phillips, he's been someone that this coaching staff trusts and believes in for, since he's arrived on campus in 2023. And you go back to that, Oklahoma State game 2 years ago where they had that thrilling game winner with Darius Laster. The original read was for JoJo Phillips, who at the time was a redshirt freshman. So there's been little glimpses and moments where it would suggest that he could be a focal point of the offense, but injuries and maybe just the emergence of Parker Kingston and the steadiness and high-level production of Chase Roberts, there maybe hasn't been that opportunity. Well, now it's there. Do you want to be the wide receiver 1 or not? It's right in front of him, and he's got to be the one that's looked upon to be that guy. Coming out of spring, he was the wide receiver 1, and Fesi Sitake said as much, that he was the first, wide receiver 1 for this unit. Can he be that? Last year at this time, I wouldn't have thought that Parker Kingston could emerge as the third leading receiver in the Big 12. I just think what hurts this group is that you don't have a clearly defined wide receiver 1 to maybe free up and create a rising star to emerge, where this is all kind of they're all on even footing, in my opinion, and that someone's got to emerge. And that's the one spot on this offense that's kind of a glaring, maybe weak spot right now going into camp.
And you talk about this Casper. I mean, is he going to go to the NBA? Is he going to be in the dunk contest? I mean, I saw some pictures of him dunking over cars and buildings and human beings and all sorts of stuff. So the athleticism obviously is there.
Yeah, it is. 6'6", and there's been no production in college football because he's had multiple foot injuries, 2 different foot injuries in his college career at Oregon. He's been in college football for 4 years. He's heading into his 5th. But he's had some medical redshirt years given to him, so he's still got this year and next if he wanted at BYU. Injuries have just derailed him. So can he stay healthy? If he does, they loved him in spring ball. But again, I think the Big 12's got better secondaries than what we've seen in the past. I think this is the depth at cornerback in the league is really good. Now, it helps that they go against one of the best ones in the conference in Evan Johnson on a regular basis, but I think that's going to be something. I've seen many BYU games of the past where they feel good about a wide receiver unit, and then they can't get off the line and they can't get open. And, so there's no Puka Nacua in this unit. There's no Chase Roberts. There's no clear star right now. So when you get kind of a pedestrian wide receiver unit, I kind of temper expectations a little bit with that spot unless they prove otherwise. And that there is some talent there, but still, I think that it's a big question mark going into camp right now.
That's Mitch Harper, our KSL Sports Insider. So we'll see what happens there. Sort of a show-me type position before you start making any pronouncements. Let's see what they can do. And they'll have that opportunity. Now, if they emerge or not, obviously it makes the team better if they do. If they don't, they're going to have to find other ways to get down the field. But the good thing is the guys up front. You always hear next man up. It seems like from the offensive line perspective, BYU has gotten into this next man up type of deal while still maintaining the same or close to level of production.
I believe so as well. I mean, I think the offensive line is going to be better this year. I do. Bruce Mitchell anchors the whole thing at that center position, and you look at Kalani's tenure at BYU head coach. It's just been it embodies that next man up. Karoma, Empey, Connor Pay, then Bruce Mitchell. That center position has just been steady throughout Kalani's tenure as the head coach, and Bruce Mitchell maybe could be the best of the group. So he's in the middle there at center. I think the tackles are going to be really good with Andrew Gentry returning at right tackle, and then Paki Finau at left tackle. Maybe a little bit of a question with Finau, considering he's primarily played guard in his football career. He's now playing a new spot at left tackle, but they want him there. They feel like he's best served to be there, and he looked really good in spring ball. And maybe a little bit of question, too, at times with the guard. Could they get maybe more production from that spot? You've got Kyle Safarcho, who I think is going to be really steady for BYU, but maybe that other guard spot at right guard, Sonny Mocassini, he was injured in spring. He comes back. He would be the assumed starter, but there's Junior Sia, Utah State transfer. Zach Yamauchi was injured in spring ball, dealing with a pec injury. Is he ready to go? Because he's from Stanford. He could be in that conversation at the guard position. But they've got options, and they still got Batmuli Talo, a top 100 recruit who, Kalani is always shy about making comparisons. He's put him in the mold of a Kingsley Suamataia and even Penei Sewell in terms of the ceiling of someone like Batmuli Talo, who was primarily playing at right tackle during spring ball in the second unit. True freshman out of Lone Peak, barely learning the offensive line position, converted over from D-line. He'll be one to watch as well. Maybe he could climb and really establish himself as in that solidified 2 deep, but also maybe make the conversation of get him to left tackle. Maybe you put Finau at guard, and then you shore up that 5 spot if, the freshman really takes off in fall camp. But they're going to be patient with him throughout this process.
That's Mitch Harper. We got one more segment with the BYU expert. You hear, man, he just rifles off these names as if he's reading a list. This dude knows his stuff. Check it all out at KSLSports.com. One more segment. We'll wrap it up, and then we'll get to the Utes. Stay with us, 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. All right, final segment talking about the BYU for today. I believe we'll continue to talk about them in the coming months. A lot. For sure. I'm super excited about this college football season because, we've got storylines all up and down the Wasatch Front. BYU, Utah expected to be good. Bronco. I covered Bronco in his first game as a head coach way back when.
Boston College is getting booed.
Yeah.
And he never let that go.
No, he did not. No, he did not. Because it was like they were inside Boston College territory, and he punts. And he got netted 15 yards or something. But I always enjoyed covering Bronco and see what he does at Utah State. And then my guy, I've known him for many years at Weber State, Coach Kerr. See what he can do. High school coach, like 110-10 was his record. So see, you can rejuvenate Weber. And as I said, I'm a Big Sky guy. Went to my 2 years at NAU. I think I went to every home game and enjoyed them. That was the first year the Dome opened up there.
Wow!
I don't know if you've been up. If you've been on.
I've seen the
Yeah. So Dome. That was our first year. My first year was the first year of the Dome. A guy named Joe Salem who went on and coached at Minnesota. Yeah, he had some success at NAU back then, and went on and moved on from there. So with that in mind, Mitch Harper joining us. We're talking about BYU football, obviously. With that in mind, just, we won't hold you to this projection, but when we get to December and the awards come out, how many first-team Big 12 guys do you think we'll have on BYU's football team?
I think they'll have 5. I would say L.J. Martin, Bruce Mitchell. I'd go Kedu Luave, Isaiah Glasker, and Evan Johnson.
Okay.
Well, 6. 6 also. Falatau Satawal as well. 6. I'll go 6.
Okay. And with football and in college, it never ends. People get excited about recruiting. Just give us an update as to where they are and what they need to get done here for guys who are going into their senior year of high school.
It was a slow build with this 2027 class that picked up some steam because there was that stretch where they lost out on Bodie Sparrow from Davis High, and that was a big loss. Because
what's the deal with Oklahoma? What's the connection?
Oklahoma, there really isn't a connection. I mean, now recently, a couple weeks ago, they had added Mania Brown as a recruiting staffer onto their staff. But I think it was just simply they look at this state as a prime opportunity to get guys that are well-developed. I mean, the resources in this state, it's pretty impressive what's being put into these high school football programs. Good character, good families, football, mature athletes, and they want to get them into their programs. And it's maybe because I think there's still this feeling in the state of Utah where we still feel like an underdog for some reason, that the in-state schools are less than in Oklahoma, where it's like, why can't BYU and Utah do everything more than what Oklahoma does? So, but I still think there's a program like Oklahoma looks at this place and says there's opportunity to pick off some top-end guys that sometimes, I mean, this state gets recruited quite a bit, but still pales in comparison to the Texases, Ohio's, Florida. Sure. So I think Oklahoma's just kind of identified a niche and said, let's go attack that state and get some really good football players, and for good reason. I think the recruiting in this state is going up, but BYU did beat out Oklahoma for Uhila Wolfgram from Maple Mountain, who I think a special edge rusher, Maple Mountain, kind of under the radar guy, but I mean, physically he could be in BYU's program right now and look every bit the part of college defensive end, which is saying something considering defensive end with high school, you would think they're going to be undersized, got to add 40 pounds or whatnot. He is ready physically already, and that was a recruitment that really took off in the winter time when he had some viral clip that went crazy in of all things, an Oklahoma drill. And then his recruitment really took off, but BYU stayed the course with him, got him. He's a 4-star kid. I think it's interesting with this upcoming fall. I don't expect much activity. They're still waiting on a Ridgeline High recruit and Owen Leishman. He was a visitor back in June. He's heading into his senior season, a linebacker / athlete tight end prospect out of Ridgeline. But with the 5-5, you could have Uluwave back. You could have Raider Mooney back. And you have all these guys that could run it back that maybe a year ago at this time when you were forecasting out recruiting classes, they weren't in your future spreadsheets and roster building. So right now they're about 15 commits right now. I wouldn't expect many more because you've got 5-5. Then you've also got the portal where you want to fill those gaps with some proven commodities. And Kalani's shown that they don't want to turn to the portal often, but typically, 7 to 10 guys every cycle you want to get. So just on a numbers game with only 105 roster spots and all the influx of return missionaries with Ryder Lyons, Brock Harris, the heralded tight end, there's just not many more spots available for that 2027 cycle unless, they'll always keep an option open for a guy that, bursts on the scene and has a big senior year and takes off. But that's one of the downsides we're seeing with the portal and this extra year of eligibility given to college guys. It's kind of weeding out that senior riser high school kid. They're not getting as many opportunities, whereas sometimes we'd see back in the day, they'd go into January or February and they're like the hot thing, because after they took off in their senior year of high school, we don't see that as much anymore when it comes to high school recruiting.
So then if you want to be a high school recruit, you better start blowing up as a junior.
Yeah, sophomore and junior year, and then those spring, 7-on-7, those camp circuits, that's where it really takes off. It's getting earlier and earlier than ever before. Honestly, I've been saying on Cougar Tracks that, July 4th is kind of the unofficial, end date when it comes to building out these recruiting classes, because then you roll into kind of a lull period for the coaches, fall camp, the regular season, and then it's focusing on the next year, 2028, and so forth. So with the early signing day, too, being in that first week of December, which coincides with conference championship week, these coaching staffs are going to think they're getting ready for a game. So you get to a point where you just don't have as much time and man hours to really go and get that senior riser that burst onto the scene was a late developer.
So then you think that they could be 90% done?
I think so, for the most part. I think for the most part they will be pretty much done when it comes to the high school recruiting, just because there's so many more buckets now. And again, they've got a really impactful return missionary class coming in. McKay Madsen's also in there, the 4-star running back, linebacker from Clovis, California.
Yeah,
they're expecting big things from him. Ryder Lyons, Harris. There's some really big return missionaries coming back. So you pair it up with that group, the true freshmen that or the high school recruits that just committed this cycle. It's near the finish line.
Those guys will be on the team in December.
Yeah, a lot of those return missionaries will be joining in January. I think they're getting
I said December. I meant January.
They're getting a little more strategic too with that. I mean, just kind of having those conversations of when are you going on your mission. Obviously, it's personal choice. They're going to choose, but in a perfect world, they're there for that winter semester and they're getting ready to roll for that spring football. And next year too, it actually won't be spring ball. It'll be off-season activities. So from January to May, you're having those different practices if in fact that gets approved. Uh-huh. So they're hoping to get, most of their guys ready for January. And again, just from a timing perspective, it makes it harder for just that high school senior to really catapult. I think of like a Lecky Fotu back in the day where he just took off at Harriman. I remember BYU and Utah were in a battle in USC. You just don't see that as much anymore because of the portal and now these 5-5 guys where you're going to keep an Uluwave. You're going to keep a Raider Damuni. You're going to keep Walker Lyons and Saliapaga, give them extra time because they're proven commodities in your program already. You're not going to take the flyer and give a roster spot and rev share money to a high school or true freshman. You want to give it to the proven commodity guys.
December coming up, December 11th, I think it is. I bought tickets to the Sphere to see my favorite band of all time, and that's the Eagles, right? And you're wondering, where is PK going with this? Well, stay with me here. So I bought the tickets. They keep saying that they're done, and that would be they play like 58 shows at the Sphere, and that was supposed to be it. Well, now they got 8 more shows, right? It's like, I got to go. They're gonna stop at some point. They're gonna die at some point. So I buy tickets, right? Take out a small loan. And I'm telling Lloyd, our program director, what about the Big 12 title game at the Cowboy Stadium? I said, relax. I said, that's the week after. It is the first Friday in December.
Yep.
Will I be in the state of Texas? Now, I got 2 options. You only got 1. I got 2. Will I be in the state of Texas the first Friday in December?
You will.
Oh, there it is.
BYU, I think, is going to go 11-1 this year.
11-1. Ho, ho, ho.
I think this is their best team, and I think that they're gonna deliver. Usually, I'm very skeptical of that because when the high expectations come, I think all of Cougar fans that look at it and go, "When's the fall coming? When's the fall coming?"
Kansas.
Look at basketball. Final Four with the Lone Pig 3 with AJ. Can't even get out of the round of 64. Can't even get to the tournament in some cases. But I do think this team, even though there's high expectations, I get the sense still that there's a little bit of that cliche chip on the shoulder still because really they haven't won anything yet. I mean, yes, they've won a lot of games and they've
best record in the Big 12 the last 2 years.
But they still haven't won a title. They haven't been to the playoff, and the nation still thinks you've hit your ceiling as a program and you're not going to do anything more. And still everyone's pointing to Texas Tech, and I still point to Texas Tech too. I think they're going to be dang good even with that Will Hammond. But I think BYU is going to be in that game on that Friday night in Arlington in December. So I think you're going to be there in Texas as well.
All right, there it is. That is Mitch Harper, our KSL Sports Insider. You can read all of his material at KSL.com, and he also does the podcast, Cougar Tracks. He's got you covered. Believe me, nobody covers it better. Stay with us. We are going to talk Utah next. We're going to give equal time, just like we should, with the Utes coming up next, right here on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.